Welcome to today's video where we are going to be considering the heart. The heart is a hollow muscular organ located in the thoracic cavity. And we need to learn the basic anatomical terminology and the basic anatomical structures in the heart before we are going further. So, this is kind of an introductory session to cover that basic anatomy. Now, of course, in anatomy, remember you always looking in someone else's. When you are looking at heart, let's write L on this side and R on other side. Here we see the main bottom chambers in the heart, and these bottom chambers are called ventricles. So we have the left ventricle on this side and right ventricle on the other side. And the left ventricle particularly has a thick muscular wall. Here we see the thick muscular wall of the left ventricle. The right ventricle also has a muscular wall, but it's much thinner. Now, why is it that the left ventricle has thick muscular wall and the right ventricle has a thin muscular wall? Well, as we'll see, it's the left ventricle that's pumping blood all around the body into the systemic circulation. So the blood that's pumped from the left ventricle goes to your ears, down your toes, up to your brain, absolutely everywhere around the body, all of the systemic circulation. So it needs to generate a fairly high pumping pressure with a large muscular mass on the left side. Whereas we will see the right ventricle is only pumping blood to the lungs. So if the heart is here, the lungs are also here, so the pressure doesn't have to be as high, so the amount of muscular mass required is less. Now the key thing about the heart is in these four chambers. Now first of all, we'll see the arteries which are leaving the heart. Now this wall here guards the aorta, which is the large vessel, leaves the left ventricle, and the valve there points up the way, and then between the ventricle at the bottom of the chamber, on its top, there is another valve that will point down the way, like that. So here we see the left ventricle with one valve there and one valve there. Now the top chambers of the wall are much thinner, muscular wall, so the muscle becomes thinner at that point. You can probably see here that we are starting to draw an additional chamber, one of the top chambers, the atria, and draining into the atria there are four large veins. I think in this diagram I have just drawn two large veins draining blood into the top chamber, the left atrium. Remember, there are actually four in humans. So now we see that we have the left ventricle, and here we can clearly see now there's an additional chamber, the left atrium. So the left ventricle, left atrium. Valve pointing down the way, valve pointing up the way. And this valve between the atria and the ventricle below is called an atrioventricular valve. And this particular valve has two cusps. It opens the left atrioventricular valve. Sometimes it is called the bicuspid valve because it has two cusps, but its proper name is the mitral valve. So the left atrioventricular valve is the mitral valve, and it has two cusps. The valve between the ventricle and the aorta, that is the aortic wall, and sometimes they are referred to as the semilunar valves because they look a bit like half a moon. So, the aortic atrial valve or the aortic semilunar valve pointing up the way. As we have said, this vessels is the aorta, the large vessel, leaving the left ventricle, taking blood all around the systemic circulation. And the veins here, remember, there are four veins taking blood into the left atrium called pulmonary veins. And of course, pulmonary means to do with the lungs, and the terminology is very simple. An artery is any vessel carrying blood away from the heart, while any vein is any vessel carrying blood towards the heart. So, because these are veins, we know that they carry blood towards the heart. They are pulmonary vein which carry the blood towards the heart from the lungs. Now we move on to the right side of the heart. In the same way here, there is a valve pointing up the way like this, and this connects to a large atrial vessel which quickly divides into two. One of the branch of this vessel go into each lung because this large vessel leaving the right atrium is the pulmonary artery. We know that pulmonary means to do with the lungs. We know that an artery is any vessel carrying blood away from the heart. Therefore, the pulmonary artery is the artery carrying blood away from the heart to the lungs. And we also notice that this valve is pointing up the way, and this is the pulmonary valve, that is the pulmonary arterial valve, also sometimes called as pulmonary arterial semilunar valve. So both of these valves are sometimes described as the semilunar valves. Now here we have the valve pointing down the way like this, and the valve, atrioventricular valve, has two cusps. This one has three cusps. So it is called the tricuspid valve. So the right atrioventricular valve is called the tricuspid valve. Just out of interest in passing, the aortic and pulmonary semilunar valve also have three cusps, but to this one we call the tricuspid valve. Now what we need to put on is the final chamber of the heart. Here we have the right atrium, and there are two large vessels flowing into the right atrium. The vessel coming from above, draining top part of the body, is superior. The vessel draining the bottom part of the body here is inferior. And both of these are referred to as the vena cava. And here we have the large vessel of the body, the superior vena cava, draining the top part of the body, and the inferior vena cava, draining the bottom part of the body, both draining blood into the right atrium. So what we can actually do now is start to describe the flow of the blood through the heart. Now, the blood coming back from the lungs is gonna come back into the pulmonary veins, and this blood is oxygenated. And if you do an oxygen saturation test on yourself, you'll probably find your oxygen saturations are above 98 to 99 percentage, anywhere between 96 and 100%. If you are young and fit, you put an oxygen saturation probe on your finger, you find it's 98%. Take a few deep breaths and it will go up to 100%, meaning your lungs are completely saturating the blood passing through them with oxygen. And this highly oxygenated blood containing the oxyhemoglobin is going to return from the lungs in the four pulmonary veins into the left atria, and from here the blood will go through the mitral valve into the left ventricle. When the left ventricle contracts, that the blood will be ejected through the aortic semilunar valve into the aorta, and from there into smaller arteries perfusing all of the systemic arterial circulation. And then as the blood goes around the tissues of the body, it's going to give up some of its oxygen, not all of it but some of it. So when it arrives back from systemic venous circulation from the top half of the body, it's going to arrive back via the superior vena cava, and from the bottom half of the body it's going to arrive back via the inferior vena cava. And this partly deoxygenated blood, which traditionally in biology we draw as blue, even though it's not blue, still dyed red, drained back into the right atrium, and from there the blood will go through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. When the right ventricle contracts, that the blood will be ejected through the pulmonary arterial semilunar valve and it will go to each lung. So the blood flows through the heart is regulated by the four valves, and it's going through the atria to the ventricles to the body, back to the right atrium, right ventricle, pulmonary artery, and off to the lungs. Now let's finish off this anatomy. We have got this four pulmonary veins, the two atria, the left and the right, and two ventricles, the left and the right ventricles. Then there are these large veins, superior vena cava and inferior vena cava, and the valves, the bicuspid, the tricuspid valve. Now we don't want the valves to over expand or over contract. Connecting the valves, there are tendons. These are called tendinous cords or cordi tendini. Now what they are is tissue holding the valves and stops them flapping back the way into the atria. Because the whole point of the valve is it is a structure to ensure the one-way flow. So we want this blood to go from the atria to the ventricle, but not back again. That would be regurgitation, which is a pathological situation. And to stop them going far back is these tendinous cords are rooted into the wall of the heart by a specialized muscle roots the tendinous cords into the wall of the heart, so that the valves can't overexpand, and these muscles that connect the tendinous cords to the wall of the hearts are papillary muscles. So we've looked at the vessels, the chambers, the muscles of the heart. Now we will see the layers of the heart. Now, round about the outside of the heart, surrounded all the outside of the heart, there is a sac which is fibrous sac because it is a physical protection to the heart in addition to the ribs and the vertebrae in the sternum. It's made up of tough fibrous tissue, and what it also does is it stops the heart from over expanding, so which would damage the heart. It is also called as pericardium. So peri means perimeter, and it's around about the outside. Cardium is the heart. So it's the pericardium form the sac in which the heart sits. Now, lining the inside of the heart, we have a layer of squamous vascular endothelial cell. It's a very thin layer, goes all about the inside of the heart, and this very important this is very important to make sure we have smooth blood flow, because we don't want any turbulence in the blood flow through the heart. So it's a nice smooth surface of squamous vascular endothelial cells, and this is called endocardium. Endo means inside, and endocardium is the inner layer of the heart. And also, this left out thick muscular middle and all this are here thick muscular wall of the ventricle, atrium, wall of the right ventricle, right atrium. All of these contains a band of specialized muscle called cardiac muscle. It's a striated muscle arranged in various bands which allows the heart to contract in the most optimum possible way, and this vital muscle, of course, is the myocardium. Myo means muscle. Myo means muscle. Muscle of the heart is the myocardium. So what we have seen is the heart of the two side. One is the left side and the right side, and the structure separating the two sides is called the septum or cardiac septum, a heart tissue separating the left heart from the right heart. Left side of the heart pumps blood to the body, and it's called body pump, and the right side of the heart pumps blood into the lungs, so it is the lung pump.